The Ape by E.F.Benson and read by Christopher Halton. Hugh Marsham had spent the day, as a good tourist should, in visiting the temples and the tombs of the kings across the river, and the magic of the hour of sunset flamed over earth and heaven as he crossed the Nile again to Luxor in his felucca. It seemed as if the whole world had been suddenly transferred into the heart of an opal and burned with a myriad fiery colours. The river itself was of the green that beech trees are clad in at springtime. The columns of the temple that stood close to its banks glowed as if lit from within by the flame of some perpetual evening sacrifice. The cloudless sky was dusky blue in the east, the blue of turquoise overhead, and melted into aquamarine above the line of desert where the sun had just sunk. All along the bank, which he was fast approaching under the press of the cool wind from the north, were crowds of Arabs padding softly home in the dust from their work, and chattering as sparrows chatter among the bushes in the long English twilights. Even the dust that hovered and hung, and was dispersed again by the wind, was rainbowed. It caught the hues from the river and the sky, and the orange flaming temple, and those who walked in it were clad in brightness. Here in the south no long English twilight lingered, and as he walked up the dusky, fragrant tunnel of mimosa that led to the hotel, night thickened, and in the sky a million stars leapt into being, while the soft gathering darkness sponged out the glories of the flaming hour. On the hotel steps the vendors of carpets and Arabian hangings, of incense and filigree work, of suspicious turquoises and more than suspicious scarabs, were already packing up their wares, and probably recounting to each other in their shrill, incomprehensible gabble the iniquitous bargains they had made with the gullible Americans and English, who so innocently purchased the wares of Manchester. Only in his accustomed corner old Abdul still squatted, for he was of a class above the ordinary vendors, a substantial dealer in antiques who had a shop in the village, where archaeologists resorted and bought sub rosa pieces that eventually found their way into European museums. He was in his shop all day, but evening found him, when serious business hours were over, on the steps of the hotel, where he sold undoubted antiquities to tourists who wanted something genuine. The day had been very hot, and Hugh felt himself disposed to linger outside the hotel in this cool dusk, and turn over the tray of scarabs which Abdul Hamid presented to his notice. He was a wrinkled, dried-up husk of a man, loquacious and ingratiating in manner, and welcomed Hugh as an old customer. "See, sir," he said, "here are 2 more scroll scarabs, like those you bought from me before the week. You should have these. They are very fine and very cheap, because I do no business this year. Mr. Rankin, you know him? Of the British Museum, he gave me £2 each last year for scroll scarabs not so fine, and today I sell them at £1.50 each. Take them, they are yours. Scroll scarabs of the 12th dynasty. If Mr. Rankin were here, he'd pay me £2 each, and be sorry I not ask more." Hugh laughed. "You may sell them to Mr. Rankin then," he said. "He comes here tomorrow." The old man, utterly unabashed, grinned and shook his head. "No, I promised you them for £1.50, he said. "I am not cheat dealer. They are yours, £1.50. Take them, take them." Hugh resisted this unparalleled offer, and turning over the contents of the tray, picked out of it and examined carefully a broken fragment of blue glaze, about 1 inch in height. This represented the head and shoulders of an ape, and the fracture had occurred halfway down the back, so that the lower part of the trunk, the forearms which apparently hung by its sides, and the hind legs were missing. On the back there was an inscription in hieroglyphics, also broken. Presumably the missing piece contained the remainder of the letters. It was modelled with extreme care and minuteness, and the face wore an expression of grotesque malevolence. "What's this broken bit of a monkey?" asked Hugh carelessly. Abdul, looking much like a monkey himself, put his eyes close to it. "Ah, that's the rarest thing in Egypt," he said. "So Mr. Rankin, he tell me, if only the monkey not broken. See the back? There it says, 'He of whom this is, let him call on me thrice.' And then some son of a dog broke it. If the rest was here, I would not take £100 for it. But now 10 years have I kept half monkey, and never comes half monkey to it. It is yours, sir, for £1 it is yours. Half monkey nothing to me. It is full monkey, only being half monkey. I let it go. I give it you, and you give me £1. Hugh Marsham felt in one pocket, then in another, with no appearance of hurry or eagerness. "There's your £1, he said casually. Abdul peered at him in the dusk. It was very odd that Hugh did not offer him half what he asked, instead of paying up without bargaining. He regretted extremely that he had not asked more. But the little blue fragment was now in Hugh's pocket, and the sovereign glistened very pleasantly in his own palm. "And what was the rest of the hieroglyphic, do you think?" Hugh asked. Allah only knows the wickedness and the power of the monkeys," said Abdul. "Once there were such in Egypt, and in the temple of Mut in Karnak, which the English dug up, you shall see a chamber with just such monkeys sitting round it, 4 of them, all carved in sandstone. But on them there is no writing. I have looked at them behind and before, they not master monkeys. Perhaps the monkey promised that whoso called on him thrice, if he were owner of the blue image of which gentleman has the half, would be his master, and that monkey would do his bidding. Who knows? It is of the old wickedness of the world, the old Egyptian blackness." Hugh got up. He had been out in the sun all day, and felt at this moment a little intimate shiver, which warned him that it was wiser to go indoors till the chill of sunset had passed. "I expect you've tried it on with a half monkey, haven't you?" he said. Abdul burst out into a toothless cackle of laughter. "Yes, Effendi," he said. "I have tried it 100 times, and nothing happens, else I would not have sold it you. Half monkey is no monkey at all. I have tried to make boy with the ink mirror see something about monkeys, but nothing comes except the clouds and the man who sweeps. No monkey." Hugh nodded to him. "Good night, you old sorcerer," he said pleasantly. As he walked up the broad flag passage to his room, carrying the half monkey in his hand, Hugh felt with a disengaged thumb in his waistcoat pocket for something he had picked up that day in the valley of the tombs of the kings. He had eaten his lunch there after an inspection of the carved and reeking corridors, and as he sat idly smoking, had reached out a lazy hand to where this thing had glittered among the pebbles. Now, entering his room, he turned up the electric light, and standing under it with his back to the window, that opened door fashion onto the 3 steps that led into the hotel garden, he fitted the fragment he had found to the fragment he had just purchased. They joined onto each other with the most absolute accuracy. Not a chip was missing. There was the complete ape, and down its back ran the complete legend. The window was open, and at this moment he heard a sudden noise as of some scampering beast in the garden outside. His light streamed out in an oblong onto the sandy path, and laying the 2 pieces of the image on the table, he looked out. But there was nothing irregular to be seen. The palm trees waved and clashed in the wind, and the rose bushes stirred and scattered their fragrance. Only right down the middle of the sandy path that ran between the beds, the ground was curiously disturbed, as by some animal, heavily frolicking, scooping and spurning the light soil as it ran. The midday train from Cairo next day brought Mr. Rankin, the eminent Egyptologist and student of occult law, a huge red man with a complete mastery of colloquial Arabic. He had but a day to spend in Luxor, for he was en route for Merawi, where lately some important finds had been made. But Hugh took occasion to show him the figure of the ape as they sat over their coffee in the garden just outside his bedroom after lunch. "I found the lower half yesterday outside one of the tombs of the kings," he said, "and the top half by the utmost luck among old Abdul's things. He told me you said that if it was complete it would be of the greatest rarity. He lied, I suppose?" Rankin gave one gasp of amazed surprise as he looked at it and read the inscription on the back. Marsham thought that his great red face suddenly paled. "Good Lord," he said. "Here, take it." And he held out the 2 pieces to him. Hugh laughed. "Why in such a hurry?" he said. "Because there comes a breaking point to every man's honesty, and I might keep it, and swear that I had given it back to you. My dear fellow, do you know what you've got?" "Indeed I don't. I want to be told," said Hugh. "And to think that it was you who only a couple of months ago asked me what a scarab was. Well, you've got there what all Egyptologists, and even more keenly than Egyptologists, all students of folklore and magic, black and white, especially black, would give their eyes to have found. Good Lord, what's that?" Hugh was sitting by his side in a deck chair, idly fitting together the 2 halves of the broken image. He too heard what had startled Rankin, for it was the same noise as had startled him last night, namely the scampering of some great frolicsome animal somewhere close to them. As he jumped up, severing his hands, the noise ceased. "Funny," he said. "I heard that last night. There's nothing. It's some stray dog in the bushes. Do tell me what it is that I've got." Rankin, who had surged to his feet also, stood listening a moment, but there was nothing to be heard but the buzzing of bees in the bushes and the chiding of the remote kites overhead. He sat down again. "Well, give me 2 minutes," he said, "and I can tell you all I know. Once upon a time, when this wonderful and secret land was alive and not dead. Oh, we have killed it with our board schools and our steamers and our religion. There was a whole hierarchy of gods, Isis, Osiris, and the rest, of whom we know a great deal. But below them there was a company of semi-divinities, demons if you will, of whom we know practically nothing. The cat was one, certain dwarfish creatures were others, but most potent of all were the cynocephali, the dog-faced apes. They were not divine, rather they were demons of hideous power, but—" and he pointed a great hand at Hugh. "They could be controlled. Men could control them, men could turn them into terrific servants, much as the genie in the Arabian Nights were controlled. But to do that you had to know the secret name of the demon, and had yourself to make an image of him, with the secret name inscribed thereon, and by that you could summon him and all the incarnate creatures of his species. So much we know from certain very guarded allusions in the Book of the Dead and other sources, for this was one of the great mysteries never openly spoken of. Here and there a priest in Karnak or Abydos or in Hierapolis had handed down to him one of those secret names, but in 9 cases out of 10 the knowledge died with him, for there was something dangerous and terrible about it all. Old Abdul here, for instance, believes that Moses had the secret names of frogs and lice, and made images of them with the secret name inscribed on them, and by those produced the plagues of Egypt. Think what you could do, think what he did if infinite power over frog nature were given you, so that the king's chamber swarmed with frogs at your word. Usually, as I said, the secret name was but sparingly passed on, but occasionally some very bold advanced spirit, such as Moses, made his image and controlled. He paused a moment, and Hugh wondered if he was in some delirious dream. Here they were, taking coffee and cigarettes underneath the shadow of a modern hotel in the year AD 1912, and this great savant was talking to him about the spell that controlled the whole frog nature in the universe. The gist, the moral of his discourse, was already perfectly clear. "That's a good joke," Hugh said. "You told your story with extraordinary gravity, and what you mean is that those 2 blue bits I hold in my hand control the whole ape nature of the world. Bravo, Rankin! For a moment you and your impressiveness almost made me take it all seriously. Lord, you do tell a story well. And what's the secret name of the ape?" Rankin turned to him with the shake of an impressive forefinger. "My dear boy," he said, "you should never be disrespectful towards the things you know nothing of. Never say a thing is moonshine till you know what you are talking about. I know at this moment exactly as much as you do about your ape image, except that I can translate its inscription, which I will do for you. On the top half is written—" He of whom this is, let him call on me thrice." Hugh interrupted. "That's what Abdul read to me," he said. "Of course. Abdul knows hieroglyphics, but on the lower half is what nobody but you and I know. 'Let him call on me thrice,' says the top half, and then there speaks what you picked up in the Valley of the Tombs, and I, Tahumet, obey the order of the Master." "Tahumet?" asked Hugh. "Yes. Now in 10 minutes I must be off to catch my train. What I have told you is all that is known about this particular affair by those who have studied folklore and magic and Egyptology. If anything happens, do be kind enough to let me know. If you were not so abominably rich, I would offer you what you liked for that little broken statue, but there's the way of the world." "Oh, it's not for sale," said Hugh gaily. "It's too interesting to sell, but what am I to do next with it? Tahumet? Shall I say Tahumet 3 times? Rankin leaned forward very hurriedly and laid his fat hand on the young man's knee. "No, for heaven's sake, just keep it by you," he said. "Be patient with it, see what happens. You might mend it perhaps. Put a drop of gum arabic on the break and make it whole. By the way, if it interests you at all, my niece Julia Draycott arrives here this evening and will wait for me here till my return from Merawi. You met her in Cairo, I think." Certainly this piece of news interested Hugh more than all the possibilities of apes and super apes. He thrust the 2 pieces of Tahumet carelessly into his pocket. "By Jove, is she really?" he said. "That's splendid. She told me she might be coming up, but didn't feel at all sure. Must you really be off? I shall come down to the station with you." While Rankin went to gather up such small luggage as he had brought with him, Hugh wandered into the hotel bureau to ask for letters, and seeing there a gum bottle, dabbed with gum the fractured edges of Tahumet. The 2 pieces joined with absolute exactitude, and wrapping a piece of paper round them to keep the edges together, he went out through the garden with Rankin. At the hotel gate was the usual crowd of donkey boys and beggars, and presently they were ambling down the village street on bored white donkeys. It was almost deserted at this hottest hour of the afternoon, but along it there moved an Arab leading a large grey ape that tramped surlily in the dust. But just before they overtook it, the beast looked round, saw Hugh, and with chatterings of delight strained at his leash. Its owner cursed and pulled it away, for Hugh nearly rode over it, but it paid no attention to him, and fairly towed him along the road after the donkeys. Rankin looked at his companion. "That's odd," he said. "That's one of your servants. I've still a couple of minutes to spare. Do you mind stopping a moment?" He shouted something in the vernacular to the Arab, who ran after them, with the beast still towing him on. When they came close, the ape stopped and bent his head to the ground in front of Hugh. "And that's odd," said Rankin. Hugh suddenly felt rather uncomfortable. "Nonsense," he said. "That's just one of his tricks. He's been taught it to get backsheesh for his master. Look, there's your train coming in. We must get on." He threw a couple of piastres to the man, and they rode on. But when they got to the station, glancing down the road, he saw that the ape was still looking after them. Julia Draycott's arrival that evening speedily put such antique imaginings as the lordship of apes out of Hugh's head. He chucked Tahumet into the box where he kept his scarabs and Ushapti figures, and devoted himself to this heartless and exquisite girl, whose mission in life appeared to be to make as miserable as possible the largest possible number of young men. Hugh had already been selected by her in Cairo as a decent victim, and now she proceeded to torture him. She had no intention whatever of marrying him, for poor Hugh was certainly ugly with his broad heavy face, and though rich, he was not nearly rich enough. But he had a couple of delightful Arab horses, and so, since there was no one else on hand to experiment with, she let him buy her a side saddle, and be with his horses, always at her disposal. She did not propose to use him for very long, for she expected young Lord Patterson, whom she did intend to marry, to follow her from Cairo within a week. She had beat a Parthian retreat from him, being convinced that he would soon find Cairo intolerable without her. And in the meantime, Hugh was excellent practice. Besides, she adored riding. They sat together one afternoon on the edge of the river opposite Karnak. She had treated him like a brute beast all morning and had watched his capability for wretchedness with the purring egoism that distinguished her. And now, as a change, she was seeing how happy she could make him. "You are such a dear," she said. "I don't know how I could have endured Luxor without you, and thanks to you it has been the loveliest week." She looked at him from below her long lashes, through which there gleamed the divinest violet, smiling like a child at her friend. "And tonight? You made some delicious plan for tonight." "Yes, it's full moon tonight," said he. "We are going to ride out to Karnak after dinner. That will be heavenly. And Mr. Marsham, do let us go alone. There's sure to be a mob from the hotel, so let's start late when they've all cleared out. Karnak in the moonlight, just with you." That completely made Hugh's mind up. For the last 3 days he had been on the lookout for a moment that should furnish the great occasion, and now, all unconsciously of course, she indicated it to him. This evening then, and his heart leapt. "Yes, yes," he said, "but why have I become Mr. Marsham again?" Again she looked at him, now with a penitent mouth. "Oh, I was such a beast to you this morning," she said. "That was why. I didn't deserve that you should be Hugh, but will you be Hugh again? Do you forgive me?" In spite of Hugh's fixing the great occasion for this evening, it might have come then, so bewitching was her penitence, had not the rest of their party on donkeys, whom they had outpaced, come streaming along the riverbank at this moment. "Ah, those tiresome people," she said. "Hughie, what a bore everybody else is except you and me." They got back to the hotel about sunset, and as they passed into the hall, the porter handed Julia a telegram which had been waiting some couple of hours. She gave a little exclamation of pleasure and surprise and turned to Hugh. "Come and have a turn in the garden, Hughie," she said, "and then I must go down for the arrival of the boat. When does it come in?" "I should think it would be here immediately," he said. "Let's go down to the river." Even as he spoke, the whistle of the approaching steamer was heard. The girl hesitated a moment. "It's a shame to take up all your time in the way I'm doing," she said. "You told me you had letters to write. Write them now. Then you'll be free after dinner." "Tomorrow will do," he said. "I'll come down with you to the boat." "No, you dear, I forbid it," she said. "Oh, do be good and write your letters. I ask you to." Rather puzzled and vaguely uncomfortable, Hugh went into the hotel. It was true that he had told her he had letters that should have been written a week ago, but something at the back of his mind insisted that this was not the girl's real reason for wanting him to do his task now. She wanted to go and meet the boat alone, and on the moment an unfounded jealousy stirred like a coiled snake in him. He told himself that it might be some inconvenient aunt whom she was going to meet, but such a suggestion did not in the least satisfy him, when he remembered the obvious pleasure with which she had read the telegram that no doubt announced this arrival. But he nailed himself to his writing table till a couple of very tepid letters were finished, and then, with growing restlessness, went out through the hall into the warm, still night. Most of the hotel had gone indoors to dress for dinner, but sitting on the veranda with her back to him was Julia. A chair was drawn in front of her, and facing her was a young man, on whose face the light shone. He was looking eagerly at her, and his hand rested on her knee. Hugh turned abruptly and went back into the hotel. He and Julia for these last 3 days had, with 2 other friends, made a very pleasant party of 4 at lunch and dinner. Tonight, when he entered the dining room, he found that places were laid here for 3 only, and that at a far distant table in the window were sitting Julia and the young man whom he had seen with her on the veranda. His identity was casually disclosed as dinner went on. One of his companions had seen Lord Patterson in Cairo. Hugh had only a wandering ear for table talk, but a quick glancing eye, ever growing more sombre, for those in the window, and his heavy face, as he noted the tokens and signs of their intimacy, grew sullen and savage. Then, before dinner was over, they rose and passed out into the garden. Jealousy can no more bear to lose sight of those to whom it owes its miseries than love can bear to be parted from the object of its adoration. And presently Hugh and his two friends went and sat, as was usual with them, on the veranda outside. Here and there about the garden were wandering couples, and in the light of the full moon, which was to be their lamp at Carnac tonight when the tiresome people had gone, he soon identified Julia and Lord Patterson. They passed and repassed down a rose-embowered alley, hidden sometimes behind bushes, and then appearing again for a few paces, and each sight of them, each vanishing of them again, served but to confirm that which already needed no confirmation. And as his jealousy grew every moment more bitter, so every moment Hugh grew more and more dangerously enraged. Apparently Lord Patterson was not one of the tiresome people whom Julia longed to get away from. Presently his two companions left him, for they were starting now to ride out to Carnac, and Hugh sat on, smoking and throwing away, half-consumed, an endless series of cigarettes. He had ordered that his two horses, one with a side saddle, should be ready at 10, and at 10 he meant to go to the girl and remind her of her engagement. Till then he would wait here, wait and watch. If the veranda had been on fire, he felt he could not have left it to seek safety in some place where he was unable to see the bushy path where the two strolled. Then they emerged from that onto the broader walk that led straight to where he was sitting, and after a few whispered words, Lord Patterson left her there and came quickly towards the hotel. He passed close by Hugh, gave him, so Hugh thought, a glance of amused derision, and went into the hotel. Julia came quickly towards him when Lord Patterson had gone. "Oh, Hughie," she said, "will you be a tremendous angel? Lord Patterson, yes, he's just gone in, such a dear. You would delight in him. Lord Patterson's only here for one night, and he's dying to see Carnac by moonlight. So will you lend us your horses? He absolutely insists I should go out there with him." The amazing effrontery of this took Hugh's breath away, and in that moment's pause his rage flamed within him. "I thought you were going out with me," he said. "I was, but, well, you see—" She made the penitent mouth again, which had seemed so enchanting to him this afternoon. "Oh, Hughie, don't you understand?" she said. Hugh got up, feeling himself to be one shaking black jelly of wounded anger. "I'm not sure if I do," he said, "but no doubt I soon shall. Anyhow, I want to ask you something. I want you to promise to marry me." She opened her great childlike eyes to their widest, then they closed into mere slits again as she broke out into a laugh. "Marry you," she said. "You silly darling fellow, that is a good joke." Suddenly from the garden there sounded the jubilant scamper of running feet, and next moment a great grey ape sprang onto the veranda beside them and looked eagerly with keen dog's eyes at Hugh, as if intent on obeying some yet unspoken command. Julia gave a little shriek of fright and clung to him. "Oh, that horrible animal!" she cried. "Hughie, take care of me!" Some sudden ray of illumination came to Hugh. All the extraordinary fantastic things that Rankin had said to him became sober and real, and simultaneously the girl's clinging fingers on his arm became like the touch of some poisonous preying thing, snake coil, or suckers of an octopus, or hooked wings of a vampire bat. Something within him still shook and trembled like a quicksand, but his conscious mind was quite clear and collected. "Go away," he said to the ape, and pointed into the garden, and it scampered off, still gleefully spurning and kicking the soft sandy path. Then he quietly turned to the girl. "There, it's gone," he said. "It was just some tame thing escaped. I saw it, or one like it, the other day on the end of a string. As for the horses, I shall be delighted to let you and Lord Patterson have them. It is 10 now. They will be round." The girl had quite recovered from her fright. "Ah, Hughie, you are a dear," she said, And you do understand?" "Yes, perfectly," said he. Julia went to dress herself for riding, and presently Hugh saw them off from the gate, with courteous wishes for a pleasant ride. Then he went back to his bedroom and opened the little box where he kept his scarabs. An hour later he was walking out alone on the road to Karnak, and in his pocket was the image of Tahumet. He had formed no clear idea of what he was meaning to do. The immediate reason for his expedition was that once again he could not bear to lose sight of Julia and her companion. The moon was high, the feathery outline of palm groves was clearly and delicately etched on the dark velvet of the heavens, and stars sat among their branches like specks of golden fruit. The caressing scent of bean flowers was wafted over the road, and often he had to stand aside to let pass a group of noisy tourists mounted on white donkeys, coming riotously home from the showpiece of Karnak by moonlight. Then, striking off the road, he passed beside the horseshoe lake, in the depths of whose black waters the stars burned unwaveringly, and by the entrance of the ruined temple of Mut. And then, with a stab of jealousy that screamed for its revenge, he saw, tied up to a pillar just within, his own horses. So they were here. He gave the beasts a wide berth, lest recognizing him they should whinny and perhaps betray his presence, and creeping in the shadow of the walls behind the row of great cat-headed statues, he stole into the inner court of the temple. Here for the first time he caught sight of the two at the far end of the enclosure, and as they turned, white-faced in the moonlight, he saw Patterson kiss the girl, and they stood there with neck and arms interlaced. Then they began walking towards him again, and he stepped into a dark chamber on his right to avoid meeting them. It had that strange stale animal odour about it that hangs in Egyptian temples, and with a thrill of glee he saw, by a ray of moonlight that streamed in through the door, that by chance he had stepped into the shrine round which sit the dog-faced apes, whose secret name he knew, and whose controlling spell lay in his breast pocket. Often he had felt the underworld horror that dwelt here as a thing petrified and corpse-like. Tonight it was petrified no longer, for the images seemed tense and quivering with the life that at any moment he could put into them. Their faces leered and hated and lusted, and all that demoniac power which seemed to be flowing into him from them was his to use as he wished. Rankin's fantastic tales were bursting with reality. He knew with the certainty with which the night watcher waits for the day that the lordship of the spirit of apes, incarnate and discarnate, would descend on him as on some anointed king the moment he thrice pronounced the secret name. He was going to do it too. He knew also that all he hesitated for now was to determine what orders their lord should give. It seemed that the image in his breast pocket was aware, for it throbbed and vibrated against his chest like a boiling kettle. He could not make up his mind what to do, but fed as with fuel by jealousy and love and hate and revenge, his sense of the magical control he wielded could be resisted no longer, but boiled over, and he drew from his pocket the image where was engraven the secret name. "Tahumet! Tahumet! Tahumet!" he shouted aloud. There was a moment's absolute stillness. Then came a wild scream of fright from his horses, and he heard them gallop off madly into the night. Slowly, like a lamp turned down and then finally turned out, the blaze of the moon faded into utter darkness. And in that darkness, which whispered with a gradually increasing noise of scratchings and scamperings, he felt that the walls of the narrow chamber where he stood were, as in a dream, going farther and farther away from him, until, though still the darkness was impenetrable, he knew that he was standing in some immense space. One wall, he fancied, was still near him, close behind him, but the space which was full of he knew not what unseen presences extended away and away to both sides of him and in front of him. Then he was aware that he was not standing but sitting, for beneath his hands he could feel the arms as of some throne, of which the seat's edge pressed him just below his knees. The animal odour he had noticed before increased enormously in pungency, and he sniffed it in ecstatically, as if it had been the scent of bean fields, and mixed with it was the sweetness of incense, and the savour as of roast meat. And at that the withdrawn light began to glow once more, only now it was not the whiteness of the moon, but a redder glow as of flames that aspired and sank again. He saw where he was now. He was seated on a chair of pink granite, and a little in front of him was a huge altar, on which limbs smoked. Overhead was a low roof supported at intervals by painted pillars, and the whole of the vast floor was full of great grey apes squatting in dense rows. Sometimes they all bowed their heads to the ground. Sometimes, as by a signal, they raised them again, and myriads of obscene, expectant eyes faced him. They glowed from within, as cat's eyes glow in the dusk, but with an infinity of hellish power. All that power was his to command, and he gloried in it. "Bring them in," he said, and no more. Indeed, he was not sure if he said it, it was just his thought. But as if he spoke the soundless language of animals, they understood, and they clambered and leaped over each other to do his bidding. Then a huddled wave of them surged up in front of where he sat, and as it broke in foam of evil eyes and paws and switching tails, it disclosed the two whom he had ordered to be brought before him. "And what shall I do with them?" he asked himself, cudgelling his monkey brain for some infamous invention. "Kiss each other," he said at length, in order to inflame the brutality of his jealousy further, and he laughed chatteringly as their white trembling lips met. He felt that all remnants of humanity were draining from him. There was but a little left in his whole nature that could be deemed to belong to a man. 100 awful schemes ran about through his brain, as sparks of fire run through the charred ashes of burnt paper. And then Julia turned her face towards him. In the hideous entry that she had made in that wave of apes, her hair had fallen down and streamed over her shoulders, and at that the sight of a woman's hair unbound, the remnant of his manhood, all that was not submerged in the foulness of his supreme apehood, made one tremendous appeal to him, like some final convulsion of the dying, and at the bidding of that impulse, his hands came together and snapped the image in two. Something screamed, the whole temple yelled with it, and mixed with it was a roaring in his ears as of great waters or hurricane winds. He stamped on the broken image, grinding it to powder below his heel, and felt the ground and the temple walls rocking round him. Then he heard someone not far off, speaking in human voice again, and no music could be so sweet. "Let's get out of the place, darling," it said. "That was an earthquake, and the horses have bolted." He heard running steps outside, which gradually grew fainter. The moon shone whitely into the little chamber with the grotesque stone apes, and at his feet was the powdered blue glaze and baked white clay of the image he had ground to dust. The end.